Hey guys, tonight we're about to embark on a journey back in time to the Inca Empire, a vast and breathtaking civilization that spanned the length of the Andes Mountains in South America. Imagine yourself standing at the edge of the world, your feet firmly planted on the high-altitude terrain, gazing out over the jagged peaks and lush valleys that were once home to millions of people. The Inca were a true marvel, building intricate cities, advanced agricultural systems, and a road network that would put many modern nations to shame. But here's the thing. Before we get too carried away with the grand empire, let's start with something simple. Food. You see, in every bustling city of the Inca, amidst all the gold and the powerful rulers, there were the street vendors. Yes, even back then, the Inca had street food. And it wasn't all potatoes and quinoa. It's easy to think of empires like the Inca as just serious business, full of emperors, rituals, and gold treasures. But trust me, the food scene was just as captivating. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Drop a comment below, telling me where you're listening from and the local time. I'm curious if we're all in different time zones, or if some of you are drifting off to sleep alongside me. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. As we step into the world of the Incas, we find that food wasn't just a means to an end. It was a complex part of their culture, religion, and daily life. Think about it. Every inch of their empire was connected by a network of roads, and every village had its own specialties and snacks. But let's zoom in on the basics first, where food became the heart of Inca life, starting with chicha, the fermented drink that flowed freely through the empire like water. You may think of beer as a modern thing, but chicha was something entirely different, made from maize, and integral to both religious ceremonies and the social fabric of the Inca people. So grab your snacks and let's begin our journey into the Inca world. A hidden snack, the story of chicha, in the heart of the Inca Empire, where the altitudes reached dizzying heights and the valleys were alive with the hum of ancient civilizations. There was one drink that held a special place in everyday life: chicha. If you were wandering the streets of an Inca city, you'd smell it before you even saw it. The warm, yeasty aroma of this fermented maize drink would fill the air, and you'd probably notice the colorful earthenware pitchers that people used to carry it, each one a small piece of pottery art. Chicha wasn't just a drink. It was a symbol of community spirituality and, oddly enough, social status. You see, chicha was made through a process called chewing maize. And not just anyone could make it. While the practice of chewing the maize and spitting it into a pot might sound a bit strange to modern ears, it was a crucial part of the fermentation process. The enzyme in human saliva helps to break down the starches in the maize, turning it into sugar that can then ferment into alcohol. Historians still argue whether this method was employed purely for convenience or if it held deeper ritual significance. But one thing's for sure, it was absolutely essential to the Inca way of life. Now you might be thinking, wait, didn't the Incas have food processing machines for that? Nope, no blenders here, just good old human ingenuity. The process of making chicha was time-consuming, and it wasn't just a drink to wash down your meal. It had a far more profound role. In fact, chicha was often used in religious rituals. It was offered to the gods during ceremonies, especially to Pachamama, the earth goddess, and Inti, the sun god. Picture it, a massive temple at the top of a mountain where priests dressed in ceremonial garb would raise their chicha-filled cups to the gods. And it wasn't just for the elite. Commoners shared in the ritual too. Chicha was the great equalizer, the drink that connected the whole society, from the emperor down to the farmers in the fields. But there's more to this story. Historians still debate whether chicha was primarily a commoner's drink, or if it was consumed by all levels of society. Some believe the emperor himself might have partaken in special types of chicha during feasts, which were sometimes brewed with added herbs or sweeteners to make them even more potent. So as you can see, this simple fermented drink wasn't just a casual sip. It was deeply woven into the fabric of Inca culture. But let's be real for a moment. Chicha wasn't just about the divine. It was also a staple for everyday life. When you walked through the streets of Cusco, the empire's capital, you'd find people sipping chicha from small clay vessels, chatting with neighbors, or even bargaining in the bustling marketplace. In fact, the marketplace was often the place where the most important transactions occurred, and not just for goods, but for social currency as well. Whether you were trading textiles, food, or even gossip, chicha was often passed around, and sharing a drink was an essential part of Inca hospitality. Imagine yourself there sitting with a local merchant exchanging goods and stories, and offering each other a cup of chicha. This wasn't just about quenching your thirst. It was about participating in a social ritual, a way of solidifying bonds, and ensuring that the fabric of the community remained tightly woven. The sacred Inca crops, maize, and potatoes. In the Inca Empire, food wasn't just something to fill your stomach. It was a deep spiritual connection to the land. At the heart of this connection were two crops that were more sacred than any gold or treasure. Maize and potatoes were the beating heart of the Inca diet. And they weren't just important for nutrition. They were revered by the gods themselves. Let's start with maize, a crop that the Inca considered not only a vital food source, but also a gift from the gods. The Incas believed that maize had a direct connection to Inti, the sun god. Every year, the Inca people held festivals dedicated to maize, where they would offer the first harvest to Inti in gratitude. This act was both spiritual and practical. The belief that the sun's energy was imbued in the maize made it an essential crop for survival. Maize was used in a variety of ways, but chicha, as we've already discussed, was one of the most prominent uses. The kernels could be ground into flour for baking bread, or even used as a base for soups and stews. But the importance of maize extended beyond food. It was also used in rituals as part of offerings to the gods, and sometimes even in medicine. Historians still argue whether the Inca truly understood the agricultural science behind maize, or whether they viewed it strictly through the lens of spirituality. Either way, maize was woven into the very fabric of their empire. Now let's shift gears to the potato. Yes, the humble potato, which has become a global staple. But for the Inca, potatoes were far from ordinary. They were nothing short of miraculous. Potatoes were considered a sacred crop that provided sustenance in the harsh Andean mountains, where the land was unforgiving and the weather unpredictable. In fact, potatoes were so revered that the Inca people had more than 3,000 different varieties, each adapted to a specific altitude or climate. Potatoes were rich in nutrients and could be dried, stored, and preserved for long periods, making them an ideal crop for the high-altitude regions. Inca farmers were expert cultivators, and they developed advanced techniques to grow potatoes in terraced fields, carefully managing the distribution of water through complex irrigation systems. They also developed the ingenious practice of freeze-drying potatoes, an early form of preservation that allowed them to store food for the long winter months when fresh produce was scarce. Historians still argue whether the Incas' potato preservation methods were purely for practical reasons, or whether they held spiritual significance. Some believe that the freeze-dried potatoes known as chuño were used in sacred ceremonies, while others think they were just a survival tool for the harsh environment. Potatoes were so vital to the Inca that they had special rituals around their cultivation. When planting a new crop, farmers would offer the first potatoes to Pachamama, the earth goddess, to ensure a bountiful harvest. In this way, the Inca maintained a direct connection to their environment, acknowledging the sacred nature of their food sources. Now imagine you're a farmer in the Inca Empire, standing on one of those terraced fields with the stunning Andes towering above you. You've just planted your potatoes for the season, carefully tending to them, knowing that the gods are watching over you. The breeze carries the scent of the earth, and you can feel the energy of Pachamama beneath your feet. It's a simple, yet profound connection to the land, to your ancestors, and to the future of your people. This was the world of the Inca, where food wasn't just about sustenance. It was about the sacred cycle of life. The mysterious, lost snacks Inca, street food. As we continue our journey through the Inca Empire, we shift our focus from the grand ceremonial feasts to something much more practical. The bustling street food of ancient cities. The Incas were masters of not only ceremonial banquets and grand meals, but also the art of quick, nutritious snacks that fueled the daily grind of their civilization. These lost snacks of the Inca are often overlooked in history, yet they were vital to the daily life of the average Incan citizen. Imagine wandering through the streets of Cusco, the capital city, where the air is thick with the scent of roasting maize and the chatter of merchants. You're surrounded by colorful textiles and the hum of conversation as vendors set up their stalls. It's easy to imagine that amidst the gold and grandeur of Inca architecture, there was also a lively scene of food stalls serving simple yet hearty snacks. These were foods meant to nourish the workers, travelers, and soldiers who were constantly on the move. Street food in Inca times wasn't just about grabbing something quick. It was about maintaining balance and energy. One of the most common snacks sold in the streets of Cusco and beyond was dried maize, often roasted and served with salt or a tangy chili sauce. This quick energy bite was a staple for the Inca people, particularly for those working in the high-altitude climate, where energy was constantly being drained by the thin air. The roasted maize gave them a burst of energy to keep going, and it was easy to eat while on the move. In addition to maize, another street food staple was popped quinoa. Now you might think of quinoa as a trendy superfood, but the Incas were cultivating it centuries before it became popular in modern kitchens. Quinoa is high in protein, which made it an excellent food for laborers, especially those who worked in the fields or traveled long distances. The popped quinoa was crunchy, slightly nutty, and could be eaten as a quick snack or mixed with other ingredients for a more filling meal. And then there were the Inca tamales, which were made from maize dough, stuffed with various fillings such as potatoes, beans, or meat. These tamales were wrapped in corn husks and served as a portable snack for those on the go. Tamales are still a popular food in modern Peru, but their roots go back centuries to the Inca Empire. These little bundles of goodness were a perfect example of Inca ingenuity providing nourishment in a compact, easy-to-carry form. But here's the thing. Despite the importance of these snacks in Inca culture, we know very little about the specific recipes or exact ways these foods were prepared. Much of what we know comes from modern-day archaeological findings and the study of Inca agricultural practices. For example, we know that the Incas were experts at preserving their food using techniques like drying and freezing to extend the shelf life of their snacks. However, the exact methods of preparation remain shrouded in mystery. Some scholars argue that these snacks may have been part of a larger ritualistic tradition, offering a connection to the gods, while others believe they were simply practical solutions to feeding a busy, highly mobile population. The mystery of Inca street food deepens when you consider the urban food culture. While some foods were considered sacred offerings to the gods, others like these, portable snacks, were more earthbound, meant to sustain the everyday person. They played a pivotal role in the city's social fabric, where people gathered in marketplaces, exchanging good stories, and of course, food. In these bustling urban areas, food wasn't just about eating. It was about connecting with others, sharing stories, and keeping the rhythm of daily life going. Food vendors, often selling simple snacks, acted as the lifeblood of the city. They were the equivalent of today's food trucks or local deli stands, bringing people together over shared bites. It's hard to imagine just how diverse and vibrant these marketplaces must have been, with the smell of roasted maize mixing with the spice of chili, the coolness of fermented chicha, and the hum of voices carrying through the streets. So as you stroll through this ancient Inca city, picture yourself with a warm tamale in hand or a bowl of quinoa, trading stories and life's little secrets with those around you. You may not be sitting in a grand palace, but in this moment, you're part of a vast and intricate civilization where food connects everyone, no matter their station in life. And these simple snacks, lost to time but rediscovered in history, are part of the heartbeat of the Inca Empire, the marketplace. Buzz, where Inca snacks flourished. Picture yourself standing in the bustling marketplaces of Cusco, the beating heart of the Inca Empire. The streets are crowded with people. Some are dressed in vibrant woven tunics, others in more simple attire. And everywhere you look, you see people exchanging goods and food. The air is alive with chatter, the clang of metal, the smell of spices, and most importantly, the intoxicating aromas of freshly prepared snacks. You might catch the sound of roasted maize crackling over an open flame, or see vendors ladling chicha from large clay vessels into wooden bowls. The marketplace isn't just a place to buy and sell. It's a social hub where stories, goods, and food are shared among the people of the empire. This is where the Inca street food culture truly came alive. The vendors often setting up their stalls along the well-worn pathways would shout their wares, enticing passers-by with the promise of a quick and hearty bite. The markets were the lifeblood of the Inca economy, where everything from fine textiles to agricultural products to snacks was exchanged. And while the elite in Inca society may have dined on elaborate feasts in grand halls, the common folk, the farmers, the travelers, and the workers would often rely on the marketplace snacks to keep them going through the day. One of the most popular snacks found in these markets was the dried potato known as chuño. This freeze-dried potato was a lifesaver in the harsh Andean climate, where food preservation was crucial for survival. The process was simple. Potatoes were left out in the cold overnight, then stomped on to remove moisture, and finally dried in the sun. What emerged was a small, shriveled potato that could last for months. While it didn't look like much chuño, packed a powerful nutritional punch. You could rehydrate it in a stew, or in some cases, eat it as is, maybe with a pinch of salt or a sprinkle of chili. It was a snack, a meal, and a portable survival food, all in one. Another favorite in the markets was corn-based products, such as mote boiled corn kernels and cachanga, a crispy fried corn flatbread. Both of these snacks were rich in calories and could keep workers energized during long days of labor in the fields or the city. Mote was often served with cheese beans or vegetables, making it a filling and nutritious meal for those on the go. But the real star of the Inca market scene was chicha, that fermented maize beverage we mentioned earlier. It wasn't just for ceremonial purposes. It was an everyday drink, enjoyed by people of all walks of life. The chicha vendors would stand at their stalls, ladling the slightly sweet, slightly sour liquid into small clay cups. It wasn't uncommon for the marketplaces to have several chicha vendors, each with their own unique recipe or twist on the drink, whether it was thickened with berries or herbs or served with a splash of chili for an extra kick. Chicha was a drink that tied the community together. And let's not forget about the small portable snacks that were easy to carry while moving through the busy markets. Fried plantains, dried meats, and even steamed buns filled with potatoes or beans could be found on nearly every corner. These snacks were cheap filling and easily consumed while walking or chatting with a friend. You didn't need a fancy table or utensils to eat these. Just grab and go. For many, these foods were a vital part of their daily routine, and they were part of what made the marketplace culture thrive. Historians still argue whether these street foods were just practical everyday meals, or whether they played a deeper role in Inca society, especially when it came to social interaction. Some believe that food served as a way to build community bonds. After all, sharing a snack, a drink, or a meal was a simple but powerful way of connecting with others. The marketplace wasn't just a place to get food. It was a place where the Inca people came together, shared stories, traded goods, and passed down traditions. Imagine walking through that marketplace, grabbing a quick bite, and standing side by side with someone who might be from a completely different part of the empire. And while the foods you're eating might seem simple, they are part of something far greater. A shared culture, a shared connection that transcends the individual. In this moment, you're not just eating to survive. You're part of something much larger than yourself, the ancient, thriving Inca Empire, the food of gods, Inca rituals and offerings. As we wander deeper into the sacred world of the Inca, it becomes clear that food wasn't just for survival. It was an offering, a ritual, a sacred part of their connection with the divine. The Incas believed that everything in their world, from the highest mountains to the deepest valleys, was imbued with spiritual significance. Food in all its forms was no exception. It was a means of honoring the gods and ensuring the balance of the world. One of the most significant deities in the Inca pantheon was Pachamama, the goddess of the earth. She was revered as the giver of life, the source of all agricultural bounty. It was said that without her, the earth would not yield its crops, and the people would not survive. To honor Pachamama, the Incas performed elaborate rituals involving food offerings. These offerings weren't just symbolic. They were an essential part of keeping the relationship between the people and the earth strong and harmonious. One of the most famous food offerings to Pachamama was chicha, the fermented maize drink we've discussed. In times of drought or poor harvest, the Inca would offer chicha to the goddess, hoping for her blessing of a bountiful crop. Chicha was also offered in funerary rituals, placed alongside the body of the deceased as a gift to ensure safe passage into the afterlife. In these moments, food wasn't just sustenance. It was a bridge between the physical world and the spiritual realm. But the offerings didn't end with chicha. The Incas also offered maize potatoes, beans, and quinoa to the gods, laying them out in sacred altars or burying them in the ground to ensure a plentiful harvest. In some ceremonies, the Incas would prepare elaborate feasts where the best of their crops and meats would be set before the gods. The most prized foods, such as guinea pigs, considered a delicacy, were sacrificed in honor of Pachamama, and the meat was often cooked and distributed among the people after the ceremony. The act of eating together after a ritual sacrifice strengthened the sense of community and shared responsibility toward the gods and the land. Inti, the sun, God was another central deity who had a significant role in the Inca food system. As the source of all life and warmth, Inti's relationship with the crops was direct and essential. To honor him, the Incas celebrated the Inti Raymi festival, a grand celebration of the sun's power. During this festival, the Inca would offer golden corn to Inti, as well as other crops that were considered gifts from the sun itself. Historians still argue whether the offerings were intended to please the gods or whether they were designed to bring the community together in a shared celebration of life. Either way, the food rituals surrounding Inti were integral to the cohesion of the Inca Empire. It wasn't just crops that were offered. Even the animals the Incas raised were part of the ritual. For example, llamas were considered sacred, and their meat was often reserved for ceremonial use. Llamas were not just a food source. They were also sacred animals that represented strength and endurance, essential qualities for the Incas' high-altitude lifestyle. The wool of llamas was used for clothing, and their presence in Inca ceremonies symbolized the connection between the earth, the people, and the divine. And it wasn't just about the food itself. The rituals surrounding food were performed with great care and reverence, often involving chants, dances, and other ceremonial acts to invoke the presence of the gods. The Inca believed that the gods were not distant figures, but were actively involved in the everyday lives of the people watching over the harvests, the health of the livestock, and the prosperity of the land. Food in this context was the most direct way of communicating with the divine. Can you imagine being there, standing at the foot of an Inca temple, watching as priests prepare the food offerings with ceremonial precision? The scent of roasted meats, boiled potatoes, and freshly baked bread fills the air, and the rhythmic chanting of the priests reverberates through the stone walls. The sun sets over the mountains, casting a golden glow over the entire ceremony. In these moments, food is not simply food. It is a sacred offering to the gods, ensuring the health and prosperity of the people for another year. This deep reverence for food and its connection to the divine was a cornerstone of Inca spirituality, and it's one of the reasons the Incas viewed their agricultural practices as not just technical, but spiritual acts. As we leave the sacred world of food offerings, remember that for the Incas, food was more than sustenance. It was the very lifeblood of their empire and a bridge between their world and the divine. Culinary traditions passed down. As we move away from the sacred rituals of the Inca, let's turn our attention to something equally important: the passing down of culinary traditions. The Inca Empire, like many ancient cultures, had a rich and vibrant food culture that wasn't just limited to royalty or priests. It was a shared legacy, one that was passed from generation to generation through oral traditions, hands-on teaching, and community rituals. The passing of culinary knowledge wasn't just about cooking. It was about preserving a way of life, a connection to the land, and the very essence of the Inca identity. You see, in Inca society, food wasn't just about following recipes. It was about rituals and community bonds. Young people were taught how to cultivate the sacred crops, how to prepare meals in the most respectful way, and how to offer food to the gods. There were even designated food teachers in each village, individuals who were responsible for ensuring that the sacred practices surrounding food were passed on to the younger generations. This wasn't just about learning how to cook. It was about instilling a sense of reverence for food and its connection to the world around them. While the Inca had a highly organized society, they still managed to maintain a remarkable level of local autonomy. Every community, every village had its own particular ways of preparing and cooking food, and these differences were celebrated. Some regions, particularly in the highlands, focused on potatoes and quinoa, while others in the lower valleys focused on maize and fruits. This diversity in food traditions was an integral part of what made Inca cuisine so unique and so resilient. Historians still argue whether these culinary practices were solely practical or if they were also meant to preserve a spiritual bond to the earth. Some believe that the focus on growing crops and the transmission of food knowledge was a way of ensuring that the people remained closely connected to the land, recognizing the earth as the provider of life. The Incas weren't just teaching their children how to cook. They were teaching them how to honor the gifts of Pachamama, the earth goddess. Food was a living tradition, something that linked the people to the past, present, and future. In the high Andes, where the climate was harsh and the ground often frozen, survival depended heavily on passing down preservation techniques. The Incas were incredibly skilled at preserving their food, whether through freeze-drying, drying under the sun, or fermentation. The knowledge of how to turn a potato into chuño freeze-dried potato, or how to turn maize into chicha, wasn't just passed down through formal teaching, but through direct experience. Children learned these techniques by watching their parents and grandparents, by working side by side with them in the fields and kitchens. These traditions were part of the DNA of Inca society, passed down like family heirlooms. But it wasn't just food that was passed down. It was also the stories of the food. Every meal had a story, a connection to the gods, and a memory of the harvest. Grandparents told their grandchildren about the first harvest of maize, or the sacred potato rituals, and elders in the community spoke about how Inti, the sun god, helped the crops grow during difficult seasons. These weren't just family meals. They were rituals with a deep respect for the divine origins of food. Imagine being a young child sitting in the warm glow of a stone kitchen, listening to the elders tell stories about the sacred harvest, while the aroma of fresh roasted potatoes and quinoa stew fills the air. You're learning not just how to cook, but also the deep spiritual connection between food, the earth, and the gods. The food, in its preparation and consumption, is a living connection to your ancestors. Every bite taken at the table is part of something much bigger than just nourishment, and this legacy was carried on even as the Inca Empire expanded. The Inca road system and their vast network of runners and messengers ensured that food knowledge traveled across the empire from the coastal regions to the highlands. These food traditions weren't bound by geography. They were meant to unite the empire. Through the exchange of crops, recipes, and food customs, the Inca strengthened their connection to each other, creating a culinary bond that held the empire together. It's fascinating to think that these culinary practices, passed down through generations, are still alive today in the heart of modern Peru. Many traditional Inca foods have remained unchanged over the centuries, from potatoes to quinoa corn and chicha. The way the Inca prepared and preserved food is still being practiced in the Andes by indigenous communities. The foods and the stories surrounding them have become a key part of modern Andean identity. So next time you bite into a crispy roasted potato or sip a cup of chicha, remember that you're not just experiencing a delicious snack. You're tasting the legacy of the Inca Empire, a tradition that has survived for centuries. You're part of a history that connects you to a civilization that valued not only the taste of food, but also the stories it carried. The role of the Inca, food gods, Pachamama and Inti. In the world of the Inca, food wasn't just a physical need. It was a spiritual act, a sacred exchange with the gods. Two of the most important deities when it came to food and agriculture were Pachamama, the earth goddess, and Inti, the sun god. These gods weren't distant figures in the Incan worldview. They were immediate present forces that affected the daily lives of the people, especially their food systems. The relationship between the Incas and these deities was one of deep reverence and mutual dependence. Pachamama, the goddess of the earth, was believed to be the source of all agricultural growth. The Incas saw her as the giver of life, whose fertile embrace allowed crops to grow and flourish. Without her, the people would be left without sustenance, and the land would be barren. As a result, agriculture was deeply tied to religious practice, and the rituals to honor Pachamama were as essential as any harvest. The Incas didn't just plant crops, they planted with a deep sense of responsibility, offering the first fruits of the harvest to Pachamama as a show of respect. In fact, it wasn't uncommon for farmers to perform ceremonies before they planted their crops. They would offer sacrifices to Pachamama, sometimes in the form of food, sometimes in the form of small offerings like corn or potatoes, asking for her blessings on their land. The Incas believed that Pachamama was always watching, ensuring that the crops grew strong and that the harvest was bountiful. If the crops didn't yield, or if there was a famine, the people blamed themselves, believing they hadn't honored Pachamama enough. But Pachamama wasn't just a passive deity. She was actively involved in the growth process. The soil, the weather, the rain, everything was considered an extension of her will. Historians still argue about the exact nature of these rituals, whether they were purely symbolic or whether the Incas truly believed that food could be directly influenced by Pachamama's divine presence. However, what is clear is that the act of growing food was seen as a spiritual connection to the goddess. Every seed planted, every potato harvested, was part of a much larger cosmic cycle. On the other hand, Inti, the sun god, was equally as important to the Inca food system. As the source of all life-giving energy, Inti's role in agriculture was pivotal. The Incas believed that the sun not only provided warmth and light, but that it nourished the plants. Much like Pachamama Inti was a source of vital energy. Without him, the crops would wither, and the earth would become dry and barren. To the Incas, Inti wasn't just a god to worship, he was a god to be celebrated, especially during the Inti Raymi festival, a grand celebration of the sun's power. During Inti Raymi, which took place during the winter solstice, the Inca people offered corn potatoes and other crops to the sun god. This was their way of thanking Inti for his power and asking for a good harvest in the coming year. The offerings included ceremonial dances, songs, and sacrifices, often accompanied by elaborate feasts. It wasn't just a festival. It was a way for the people to give thanks to the sun for making the earth fertile and allowing them to grow their food. One fascinating thing about Inti was the special connection between the Inca emperor and the sun god. The emperor, considered the Sapa Inca, was believed to be the son of Inti, making him a direct descendant of the sun itself. This belief elevated the emperor's role not just as a political leader, but as a spiritual figure who had the power to communicate with the gods. The emperor's role in food rituals was central. He would often oversee the grand feasts during Inti Raymi and would personally give thanks to Inti for the year's harvest. Imagine you're there during the Inti Raymi festival. The air is thick with the sounds of drums and the scent of roasted meats. The sun in all its glory beats down on the city of Cusco, and people from all walks of life gather to celebrate the power of the sun. You can see the Sapa Inca at the center of the ceremony, raising his hands to the sky, his face filled with reverence as the people offer their food and prayers. The energy in the air is palpable. This isn't just a festival. It's a sacred act of unity between the people, the gods, and the land. It's a reminder that the food on their plates isn't just sustenance. It's a gift from the gods themselves, carefully cultivated through divine power. As you watch the ceremony unfold, you begin to understand how deeply the Inca people were connected to their gods. The act of eating wasn't just about filling your belly. It was about giving thanks to Pachamama and Inti, acknowledging their divine gifts and ensuring the prosperity of the land for the generations to come. Food was sacred, and the relationship between the Inca people and their gods was as nourishing as the food itself. Culinary trials, Inca food preservation. Techniques. As we move through the history of the Inca, it's hard not to be impressed by their ingenuity, especially when it comes to food preservation. Living in the Andes, mountains with their high altitudes, fluctuating temperatures, and unpredictable weather, the Inca people needed to be incredibly resourceful. Their survival relied heavily on their ability to store food for long periods. And in this realm, the Inca were experts. One of the most remarkable food preservation techniques developed by the Incas was freeze drying, which allowed them to store potatoes, maize, and even meat for extended periods without refrigeration. The method involved exposing food to the harsh mountain cold, freezing it overnight, and then removing the moisture by allowing it to dry in the sun during the day. This process not only preserved the food for months, but also enhanced its nutritional value. For example, the chuño, a freeze-dried potato, could be stored in large sacks and used as a source of nourishment during the long, cold winters when fresh food was scarce. The Incas were so adept at this process that they could freeze-dry potatoes at the high altitudes where the air was thin and cold enough to do so naturally. Historians still debate whether the Incas knew the scientific principles behind freeze drying, or whether it was simply a matter of trial and error. Some suggest the process may have been discovered accidentally when early Inca farmers stored potatoes outside during the cold nights of the highlands, only to find that the food had dried out in a way that made it last longer. Others argue that it was a conscious decision based on the need for survival in the harsh Andean environment. Whatever the case, the result was a revolutionary food preservation method that allowed the Inca to thrive in one of the most challenging climates on Earth. But potatoes weren't the only food preserved by the Inca. Maize, a staple of the Inca diet, was often dried and ground into flour, which could be stored for months or even years. This flour, made from maize, was used in various forms to make bread, porridge, and other traditional foods. It was also used to make chicha, the fermented maize beverage we've discussed before. When it came to maize, the Inca were experts in fermentation, a process that helped preserve the crop, while also adding flavor and nutritional value. Another preservation method used by the Incas was salting. Meat, particularly llama and alpaca, would be salted and dried, a technique that helped extend the shelf life of the meat, especially in the high-altitude regions where food was scarce. Salt, which was a valuable commodity in the Inca Empire, was used to preserve meats and fish caught in the rivers or on the coast. The salted llama meat could be stored for months and served as a reliable food source during long journeys or during seasons when fresh meat was not available. In addition to these preservation methods, the Incas also used a form of fermentation for other foods, including quinoa and beans, which were key parts of their diet. Fermentation helped to enhance the flavor and digestibility of these foods, and it also played a role in preserving them for long periods. This technique, still used today in many cultures, was essential in a world without modern refrigeration. Historians still debate the exact methods the Incas used to ferment their foods, as much of the evidence comes from archaeological findings and indirect clues. Some argue that the process of fermentation was largely influenced by the environment and the natural conditions of the Andean region. Others believe the Incas had a deep understanding of the biological processes of fermentation, using it not only as a food preservation technique, but also as a way to enhance the nutritional content of their diet. Inca food preservation wasn't just about survival. It was about thriving in an environment that could be as harsh as it was beautiful. These techniques were ingrained in the very fabric of Inca society. Children grew up learning how to store and preserve food, just as they learned how to grow crops and make meals. Food preservation wasn't just a matter of storing food for later. It was a form of cultural knowledge passed down from generation to generation. It allowed the Incas to sustain themselves even in times of scarcity, and it helped them to build a powerful empire that lasted for centuries. Imagine you're living in a small Inca village, and you've just harvested the season's crop. You gather around with your family, preparing the food for preservation. Some of the maize will be freeze-dried, some will be ground into flour, and the potatoes will be stored to make chuño. The preservation process is a communal event, a time for the family to work together, ensuring that the food will last through the cold winter. You can hear the crunch of the dried potatoes and smell the salted meat, knowing that your survival depends on the careful use of these ancient techniques. It's a hard but necessary job, and it connects you to the generations of people who came before you, who learned these methods through trial error and a deep understanding of the land. The Inca imperial feast, banquets, and rituals. As we step into the realm of the Inca Empire's elite, we find that food takes on an even more elevated significance. While the common people of the empire relied on the simple but vital snacks of street food to get them through the day, the emperors and their courts enjoyed lavish banquets that were more than just meals. They were rituals, spectacles, and powerful displays of the empire's grandeur. The grand feasts held by the Inca weren't just about food. They were events of statecraft opportunities to demonstrate the emperor's wealth, divine connection, and control over his subjects. The Sapa Inca, the emperor of the Inca Empire, was seen as the descendant of the sun god Inti. This made him not only a political leader, but also a divinely chosen ruler. As such, the feasts he hosted were not just for enjoyment. They were a way to solidify his divine right to rule and to reinforce the power of the Inca state. These banquets would often coincide with important religious ceremonies, and the food served was sacred, meant to honor the gods and ensure the prosperity of the empire. At a typical Inca imperial banquet, the food was plentiful and rich in variety, showcasing the wealth and agricultural prowess of the empire. The elite enjoyed roast meats, particularly guinea pigs, which were considered a delicacy, and llama meat, which was often prepared in a variety of ways, including roasting, steaming, and boiling. There were also stews made from potatoes, maize beans, and various vegetables served in large communal bowls for the guests to share. Chicha, the ceremonial maize drink we've mentioned before, flowed freely during these feasts, served in golden vessels to highlight the royal connection to the sun god. One of the most fascinating elements of these imperial feasts was their ritual significance. The Inca didn't just eat, they performed food rituals as part of the feast. Before the first bite offerings would be made to the gods, and sacrifices, often in the form of llamas or guinea pigs, would be prepared and offered to Pachamama, the earth goddess, and Inti. These sacrifices weren't just symbolic. They were seen as a divine exchange, ensuring the continued prosperity of the empire. The Inca believed that by giving to the gods in such a lavish manner, they would ensure a bountiful harvest and good fortune for the people. Imagine you're attending one of these royal feasts. The golden chalices of chicha are being passed around, the sizzling sounds of roasted meats fill the air, and the aroma of freshly baked bread and stewed potatoes makes your mouth water. The emperor sits at the head of the table, his presence a reminder of the divine power he wields, while the guests, noblemen, priests, and high-ranking officials gather around, sharing stories and engaging in conversation. But it's not just about food. It's a moment to reaffirm loyalty to the emperor, to honor the gods, and to celebrate the prosperity of the empire. The emperor's role in this feast is not just as a host, but as the mediator between the gods and the people, ensuring the continued success of the empire. Historians still debate how much of these feasts were truly about piety and how much was about political power. Some argue that these lavish displays of wealth and abundance were meant to remind the people of the emperor's divine right to rule, while others believe that the religious rituals were genuinely intended to invoke blessings from the gods. Either way, these banquets played a critical role in Inca society, reaffirming both the spiritual and political stability of the empire. The imperial feasts were also opportunities to showcase the diversity of the empire's food culture. The Inca Empire spanned vast territories, from the coastal regions of modern-day Peru to the highlands of Bolivia and Ecuador. Each region brought its own local flavors, ingredients, and cooking techniques to the table. In a single banquet, you could sample fish from the coast potatoes from the highlands and chili peppers from the jungle. These feasts were a culinary celebration of the empire's diversity, with each dish telling a story of the land from which it came. But not all feasts were grand affairs for the emperor's court. In fact, the Inca held several regional feasts that were meant to bring the people together in celebration. These feasts were typically held after a successful harvest or to mark important religious festivals. While the food at these feasts wasn't as extravagant as the imperial banquets, it still played a central role in bringing the community together. Much like the street food and smaller gatherings, these feasts were a way to strengthen social bonds and reinforce the shared connection to the land and the gods. As the evening of the feast comes to an end, you can hear the soft murmurs of conversation fading into the darkness of the Andean night. The meal has been eaten, the rituals have been performed, and the gods have been honored. It's more than just a feast. It's a reaffirmation of power, a renewal of faith, and a reminder of the divine forces that shape the lives of the Inca people. Spices and flavors. Inca, food beyond the basics. We've learned a lot about the staple foods of the Inca maize potatoes, quinoa. But what about the flavors that elevated these simple ingredients? While the Inca didn't have access to the global spices we enjoy today, they managed to create a rich and diverse culinary palette with a few essential ingredients that were uniquely theirs. The landscape they inhabited, from the high-altitude Andes to the lush Amazonian foothills gave the Incas a treasure trove of flavors to work with, many of which are still used in Peruvian cuisine today. One of the key spices used in Inca cooking was ají, a type of chili pepper native to the Andes. Ají was more than just a spicy addition to food. It was integral to Inca cuisine. The Incas used it in stews, soups, and even in their fermented drinks like chicha. Ají was often dried and ground into a powder, much like modern chili flakes, and it added a distinctive heat and depth to dishes. The Incas didn't just use ají for flavor. They saw it as an essential component of their diet, one that had both culinary and medicinal properties. Historians still argue whether the heat of ají was a symbol of the power of the sun god Inti, or whether it was simply a practical seasoning for the high-altitude lifestyle where hearty, spiced meals could provide necessary warmth and energy. Another key ingredient in Inca food was coca leaves, which were not used for flavoring food in the conventional sense, but for their energizing and medicinal properties. Coca leaves, from which modern-day cocaine is derived, were chewed by the Incas to help them cope with the physical demands of life in the high Andes. The leaves would help stave off fatigue and hunger, giving the Incas the energy they needed to carry out their daily tasks, whether it was working in the fields or marching to battle. Coca was revered as a sacred plant connected to the gods, particularly the mountain gods who protected the people, though it wasn't used in food. In the same way that we think of spices today, coca was a vital part of the Inca diet and a key element in their connection to the land and the divine. Historians still debate the significance of coca leaf rituals and whether they were primarily medicinal or whether they had a more spiritual purpose. Some believe that the Inca chewed coca leaves as part of their religious ceremonies to better commune with the gods, while others argue that the practice was purely utilitarian, aimed at enhancing physical endurance. Regardless of the purpose, coca leaves were a key part of the daily life for the Inca people. While the Incas didn't have access to spices like black pepper or nutmeg, they did have herbs that added unique flavors to their dishes. One of these was huacatay, a type of Andean herb with a strong aromatic flavor, often compared to a mixture of basil and mint. Huacatay was used to season stews, soups, and grilled meats, and it was sometimes mixed into chicha or other fermented drinks. The herb was so valued by the Incas that it was used as an offering to the gods. Some researchers even argue that huacatay was seen as a sacred plant associated with the earth and the healing properties of Pachamama. In addition to the herbs and spices used in their cooking, the Inca also had access to native fruits that added sweetness and complexity to their dishes. Fruits like the lucuma, a sweet yellow fruit with a custard-like texture, and the chirimoya, often called the ice cream fruit for its creamy consistency, were enjoyed by the Inca people. These fruits weren't just eaten fresh. They were often used to make desserts and fermented beverages, contributing sweetness and flavor to the Incas' otherwise savory meals. While the Inca didn't have sugar in the same sense that we do today, these native fruits provided natural sweetness. They were often served alongside more savory dishes, like roasted meats or potatoes, and balanced out the spiciness of aji or the richness of llama stews. In this way, the Inca diet was a perfectly balanced fusion of sweet and savory heat, and cool with flavors that complemented each other perfectly. It's easy to think of the Inca food culture as simple, especially when we focus on the basic ingredients of maize and potatoes. But when we dig deeper, we find a culinary world full of rich flavors, complex textures, and carefully cultivated tastes. The Inca knew how to transform the resources around them into food that was not only nutritious, but delicious. And they achieved this through their profound understanding of the land and the divine connection between food and the gods. Imagine yourself sitting at an Inca feast, savoring a plate of roasted llama spiced with a sprinkle of aji and balanced with the refreshing flavor of lucuma. The heat from the aji burns your mouth. The richness of the meat fills your senses, and the cool sweetness of the fruit brings everything into harmony. With each bite, you are reminded of the intricate relationship between the earth, the gods, and the people. This is not just a meal. It's a reflection of the Inca worldview, a world where food was more than just sustenance. It was a way to connect with the land and the divine, the Inca diet and health. As we continue our journey through the culinary world of the Inca Empire, let's pause and take a moment to consider the health of the Inca people. With all the feasts, the rich foods, and the ceremonial offerings, how did the diet of the Inca contribute to their overall well-being? While we often think of ancient civilizations as struggling with poor health due to limited resources or modern diseases, the Inca diet was in many ways advanced and carefully structured to promote a balanced lifestyle. The Incas were skilled at growing nutritious crops, especially those like quinoa potatoes and maize. These foods weren't just staples. They were full of the essential nutrients that the body needed to thrive in the challenging environment of the Andes Mountains. Potatoes, for example, are a rich source of carbohydrates, providing a steady source of energy for the Incas as they worked the fields, built monumental structures, and traveled the extensive road network that connected the empire. Potatoes also provided a lot of vitamin C, which helped prevent scurvy, a common ailment among other ancient cultures that lacked access to fresh fruit. Similarly, quinoa, another staple of the Inca diet, was packed with protein fiber and essential amino acids. It's often considered a superfood in today's world, and the Incas were eating it centuries ago. Quinoa was incredibly versatile. It could be used in soups, baked into bread, or eaten as a grain on its own. For the Inca, quinoa wasn't just a healthy food. It was seen as a sacred crop that was honored in religious rituals and feasts. But it wasn't just the crops that kept the Inca healthy. It was their understanding of the balance between different food groups. The Inca diet wasn't just a monotonous diet of potatoes and maize. They ate a variety of foods, from vegetables to fruits to meats, making sure they got a wide range of nutrients. While guinea pigs and llama meat were considered delicacies, the average person in the Inca Empire likely consumed more plant-based foods, particularly potatoes, quinoa, and beans. These plant-based foods were high in fiber and low in fat, making the Inca diet both nutritious and heart-healthy. Historians still argue whether the Inca people experienced the same types of health issues that plague modern societies, like obesity or cardiovascular disease. Some scholars believe that the Incas' active lifestyle, combined with their largely plant-based diet, kept them in good shape. Others suggest that the elites who had access to richer foods and more sedentary lifestyles may have faced health challenges similar to those we see today. What is clear, however, is that the average Inca was generally quite fit and healthy, due in part to the active lifestyle required by the empire's agricultural and societal demands. The Inca also understood the importance of food hygiene and health practices. They would cleanse and purify their food before eating it, and used herbal remedies to address common ailments. For instance, the Inca used herbs like mint oregano and epazote to help with digestion and prevent foodborne illnesses. They also used coca leaves for more than just energy. These leaves had mild anesthetic properties and were used to ease pain, treat nausea, and even help people adjust to the high-altitude conditions of the Andes. In fact, coca leaves were an essential part of the Incas' health strategy, helping them cope with the physical demands of living in one of the most challenging environments in the world. But while the Incas were incredibly resourceful when it came to maintaining health, they weren't without their challenges. Despite their rich and varied diet, the Incas were still susceptible to diseases and health issues, particularly when it came to malnutrition during times of hardship or in regions where crops didn't thrive. This is where the Incas' food preservation techniques became vital. In times of drought or when crops failed, the freeze-dried potatoes, chuño, and other preserved foods would keep people from starving. The chicha drink, too, was often used as a nutrient-rich drink, helping people to survive when fresh food was scarce. You can almost picture the Incas standing high in the mountains, munching on a bit of dried chuño or sipping some chicha in the middle of a long journey. These foods weren't just for pleasure. They were part of a careful, balanced diet designed to keep them healthy and energized in one of the most demanding environments on Earth. In this sense, the Inca diet was a perfect balance of practicality and spirituality, designed not only to nourish the body, but to connect the people to the land and the gods. Even today, the legacy of the Inca diet lives on in modern Peru, where many of the same traditional foods, potatoes, quinoa, and maize, continue to form the foundation of the national cuisine. And just as the Inca people understood the vital importance of their food, we can look to their practices for inspiration in our own health. So next time you sit down to a plate of quinoa or enjoy a bowl of potatoes, think about the ancient wisdom behind those foods, how they were grown, preserved, and celebrated for thousands of years. Food for the Incas wasn't just about nutrition. It was about survival, community, and spirituality. From emperor to commoner, the food divide. As we've seen, the food of the Inca Empire was not only a reflection of the empire's vast agricultural prowess, but also a symbol of status and power. Food in the Inca Empire wasn't just about sustenance. It was also about who you were in society. The way food was consumed, prepared, and offered varied dramatically between the elite and the commoners, creating a clear divide in terms of both access and experience. At the top of the food hierarchy was the Sapa Inca, the emperor, who enjoyed the finest dishes available in the empire. His meals were a blend of luxury ritual and power. The Sapa Inca's feasts were grand affairs attended by nobles, priests, and the highest-ranking officials, where exotic meats like guinea pigs, llamas, and even wild game were served. In addition to these meats, the emperor would also be offered golden maize quinoa dishes and fruits that were considered sacred or rare. These feasts weren't just about indulgence. They were about demonstrating the emperor's divine right to rule and his connection to the gods. Inti, the sun god, was believed to watch over these meals, as the emperor was considered his earthly representative. Meanwhile, the elite nobility of the Inca Empire, though not having access to the same luxury as the emperor, still had access to some of the best food the empire had to offer. They would eat roasted meats, freshly prepared potatoes, and corn-based dishes. They, too, would partake in chicha, but with more elaborate flavors, sometimes with added fruits or herbs. Their feasts were grander than those of commoners, but they still carried a sense of humility, reflecting the Inca belief that food should always be shared and enjoyed in community. In contrast, The commoners, while still eating a varied and nutritious diet, had less access to the luxury foods enjoyed by the upper classes. Their meals largely consisted of potatoes, maize, and quinoa, with the occasional meat when available. Meat was a rare commodity. For commoners, llama and guinea pigs were reserved for the elite and religious rituals. For the majority of the population, a typical meal might consist of dried potatoes, chuño, and a simple stew made from local vegetables or mote-boiled maize, a dish that was affordable and easily prepared. However, even the commoners had access to chicha, the fermented maize beverage, which was both a nutritional and ritualistic drink. Historians still argue whether the food divide between the elite and commoners was socio-economic, or whether it was tied to religious beliefs. Some suggest that the Inca Empire used food as a way to reinforce the social hierarchy, where access to certain foods was seen as a sign of divine favor. Others argue that the food divide was simply a practical matter. Certain foods were scarcer or more difficult to prepare, and so they were reserved for those who had the resources to afford them. Regardless of the reasoning, the divide was clear. The best food went to the ruler and the nobility, while the common people had a more simple, humble diet. Despite this food divide, however, there was a sense of unity in Inca society when it came to sharing food. The act of sharing meals, whether in the markets, in the streets, or at a communal table, was a deeply social and spiritual practice. Food, even in its most basic forms, was a way of coming together, of honoring the gods and the earth that provided it. The ritual of food sharing was essential for maintaining harmony within Inca society, transcending the divide between social classes. Imagine you're a commoner living in the bustling marketplaces of Cusco, the capital city of the Inca Empire. You're part of the lower class, but you're still able to gather with your neighbors to share a simple meal of boiled potatoes and chicha. Despite the difference in food quality between the elite and the common folk, you are part of something much larger, a society that revolves around the shared values of community faith and respect for the land. For the elite, food was about showing power and maintaining their divine connection to the gods. For the commoners, food was a reminder of the earth's gifts and the unity of the empire. And in both cases, food was a symbol of the Inca belief that everything in the world, from the highest mountain to the deepest valley, was interconnected, nourishing the people, nourishing the land, and nourishing the spirit. The fall of the Inca Empire and its snacks. The Inca Empire, once an incredibly powerful and prosperous civilization, met its tragic end in the early 1500s when Spanish conquistadors, led by Francisco Pizarro, arrived in the Andes. The fall of the Inca Empire is often remembered for the collapse of a mighty civilization. Its capital city of Cusco sacked, and its emperor, Atahualpa, captured and executed. But as the empire crumbled under the weight of foreign conquest, the empire's culinary traditions, especially the humble snacks that had sustained the common folk, lived on in the hearts and kitchens of the survivors. The arrival of the Spanish brought massive upheaval, not just in terms of political and social structures, but also in food. The Spanish introduced new ingredients such as wheat, citrus fruits, rice, and livestock, including pigs and chickens, which began to mix with traditional Inca ingredients. While these new foods transformed Inca cuisine, many traditional foods, like potatoes, quinoa, and maize, endured, becoming staples in modern Peruvian cuisine. Even the beloved chicha, despite the Spanish attempts to replace it with wine and alcohol, remained a significant part of the Andean culinary culture. During the period of Spanish rule, much of the Inca food culture was suppressed or forgotten, particularly in the elite circles that now adopted European culinary practices. But in the villages and highlands, where the common people still lived by the old ways, Inca food traditions survived not just in terms of the foods themselves, but in the practices surrounding them. The freeze-drying of potatoes, for example, continued in remote regions of the Andes, where the chuño became an essential survival food for people living in the harsh, high-altitude environment. The Inca Empire may have fallen, but its food culture remained resilient. Local communities continued to cultivate the same potatoes, maize, and quinoa that had once sustained the empire. The art of food preservation, developed through centuries of Inca agricultural knowledge, remained a vital skill for survival in the harsh Andean climate. These traditional foods continued to be used not just for sustenance, but as a way to remember and honor the empire's legacy. Even today, many of the foods that were integral to the Inca diet, potatoes, corn, quinoa, maize, and beans, remain key parts of modern Peruvian cuisine, with more than 3,000 varieties of potatoes still grown in the Andes. The spirit of the Inca diet lives on in the vibrant markets of Cusco and Lima, where street food stalls still serve mote roasted potatoes, tamales, and chicha, echoing the culinary practices of a lost empire. Historians still debate how much of the Inca food culture was replaced or transformed during the Spanish conquest. Some argue that the Spanish colonialists brought a degree of culinary diversification that led to the emergence of new dishes, while others believe that the core of the Inca diet, based on corn, potatoes, and quinoa, remained largely intact. What is clear, though, is that food played a key role in the Inca Empire's downfall. The Spanish, with their superior weapons and unfamiliar diseases, overpowered the Inca. But the food traditions of the Andean people endured. It's hard not to feel a sense of nostalgia for a time when food wasn't just about convenience or indulgence. It was about survival ritual and connection to the gods. Imagine what it must have been like to eat a simple meal of chunyo or a bowl of moat after a long day of work, knowing that the food on your plate wasn't just nourishment. It was part of a deep, sacred relationship with the earth. While the Inca Empire may have been destroyed, its cultural legacy, especially its culinary heritage, remains a part of the soul of modern Peru. Today, as you sit down to eat your own meal, whether it's a bowl of quinoa or a side of potatoes, take a moment to think about the ancient people who cultivated these foods, preserved them, and shared them. You're not just eating for survival. You're partaking in a ritual that connects you to a long line of history. The snacks of the Inca, from roasted maize to tamales, may have been lost to time, but their legacy endures in the food we still enjoy today. The legacy of Inca snacks. Today, as we reach the final chapter of our journey through the Inca Empire's food culture, it's remarkable to consider the lasting legacy of their snacks, rituals, and agricultural ingenuity. The Inca may have fallen to external forces, but their culinary practices have endured and evolved, finding a place in the modern world. Their ancient knowledge of food preservation, sustainable farming, and flavor balance lives on in the markets and kitchens of modern-day Peru, where Inca-inspired dishes continue to play an essential role in the national cuisine. The humble potato, which the Inca perfected long before it became a worldwide staple, is still a source of pride in the Andean regions. Peru is still considered the birthplace of the potato, with over 3,000 varieties grown in the highlands. The Inca knew this crop well, using it not only for everyday meals, but also for ceremonial purposes, offering the first harvest to the gods. Today, you can find countless potato-based dishes in Peru, from the simple papas a la huancaína, boiled potatoes, with a spicy cheese sauce, to more modern interpretations in Peruvian haute cuisine. The rich variety of potatoes still used in traditional and innovative ways is a tribute to the Inca mastery of this versatile crop. But it's not just potatoes that have stood the test of time. Quinoa, another sacred crop for the Inca, has surged in popularity globally in recent years as a superfood. High in protein and fiber, quinoa is now cultivated around the world, but the Andes remain its spiritual and agricultural home. The Incas knew the value of quinoa long before it became a trendy addition to salads and bowls. Today, it is still grown in Peru and other Andean countries, where it's used in everything from soups to stews, as well as baked goods and even desserts. One of the most enduring legacies of Inca snacks is the vibrant street food culture that continues in places like Cusco and Lima. If you were to walk through the bustling streets of these cities today, you would still encounter many of the same foods the Inca ate. You might see vendors selling roasted maize or offering tamales filled with potatoes, beans, or meat. The smell of fried empanadas and the sound of people chatting over a steaming cup of chicha transport you back in time to the very streets where the Inca marketplace thrived. These foods, once eaten by peasants and royalty alike, are now part of a thriving, modern Peruvian street food scene, where the ancient flavors meet the needs of the contemporary world. Even chicha, the fermented maize drink that was once a sacred offering to the gods, is alive and well in modern Peru. You can still find chicha vendors in the markets serving up the drink to locals and tourists alike. While the recipe may have changed a bit over the centuries, the essence of the drink remains the same. It's still made from fermented maize and still carries with it the spirit of the Inca tradition. In some places, chicha is even used in rituals, much like the Incas did to mark important events or celebrate the harvest. While the spiritual and ceremonial aspects may have faded somewhat, the drink still symbolizes the deep connection between the people of the Andes and their ancestors. There's something deeply satisfying about seeing these Inca food traditions live on in modern-day Peru. These foods, which once sustained an empire, now continue to sustain communities, providing both nourishment and a sense of identity. The foods of the Inca Empire are no longer just a part of history. They're a living heritage passed down through generations and celebrated in modern-day Peruvian cuisine. And while the Inca Empire may have crumbled under the weight of foreign conquest, its culinary legacy has endured. The techniques, the recipes, and the love for simple yet flavorful food that were so deeply ingrained in Inca society still form the foundation of one of the world's most unique and diverse food cultures. From potatoes to quinoa, from chicha to tamales, the food of the Incas is alive and well, living on in kitchens and street stalls across the Andes. As we close tonight's journey, think about the ancient snack that started it all. A simple roasted ear of maize, its golden kernels popping and crackling over the flames. In that moment, the Incas weren't just cooking, they were connecting with the land, the gods, and each other. And perhaps, as you enjoy a simple meal or snack of your own tonight, you can feel that same connection, remembering the legacy of those who cultivated, preserved, and celebrated food long before us. Now dim the lights, take a deep breath, and let the ancient wisdom of the Inca snacks wrap around you as you drift off into the peaceful night.